Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Boris, and I'm a program manager on the Security, Compliance, and Management Customer Experience team. If this is the first time you are tuning into the CxE podcast series, I highly recommend beginning with episode 1, where you can meet the entire Cloud App Security CxE team, as well as hear about our top features and roadmap items. If you have tuned in previously, welcome back, and I am thrilled to be a part of our second episode, focused on a topic that has been brought up again and again by our customers. Today, we will be deep diving into the better together story that exists between MCAS and Sentinel. But before we jump into our agenda, I want to give our very special guests a chance to introduce themselves. All right, so Christopher, can I start with you?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. Christopher Romeo Munoz here. I'm a program manager, part of the Cloud and Artificial Intelligence Division. My focus is to help security operations centers minimize the amount of risk that they have every single day and also modernize their security operations and also embrace cybersecurity as part of the entire lifecycle.
Awesome, Christopher. I was just speaking with Sebastian Molendijk, and he mentioned that you two recently were going to do a podcast on Sentinel. Has that already happened?
Yeah, so we actually have a podcast that's going to be on watches versus threat intel. It's going to provide a better understanding when it comes to when do you actually use watches within Azure Sentinel? What are the different security use cases that can be satisfied? And of course, threat intel, what's the vital role that it places across the SIM lifecycle? And also, what are the use case for that as well? I also want to mention that we do have a future podcast coming up with Sebastian, myself, and Atai, who's the feature manager for the UBA feature in Azure Sentinel, which can greatly reduce the alert fatigue. So the UBA feature was released GA about a year ago, and it is now one of the vital features in Azure Sentinel that can help provide an entry point for any SOC analyst to really understand the risk and the deviations across the SOC.
That's awesome. I think that's going to be great for a lot of our customers. All right, our next guest should be a very familiar name and voice for our listeners, as he is featured numerous times in our MCAS Ninja training. How are you doing today, Matt?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. A little bit about me, Matt Sosman. I'm a cloud solutions architect on the One Commercial partner team. And so I basically go out and I help our Microsoft partners utilize these amazing security solutions out there with their clients. So really excited to be doing this podcast with y'all.
Awesome. Matt, before we started recording, I was looking through your content so I could call out some of the videos of yours that I have used the most. I really wanted to give a shout out to your user entity and behavior analytics video. I know at least myself and another colleague have been able to forward that to some of our customers. And I recently saw that in late January, you also did one for a log collector deployment, which is going to help so much. We get a ton of questions around that one, so I'm really excited about it.
Oh, thank you.
All right. I'm thrilled to have you both join our episode today, but we definitely thought it would be best to align our listeners with Sentinel's overall architecture and integration to start. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Christopher.
All right. So thanks again, Erin, for the great introduction there. First of all, I want to talk about the different challenges that we have across the cybersecurity landscape, how hard it has been the past year for customers to really adopt the proper controls and proper principles across their cybersecurity strategy to stay ahead of these sophisticated threats. The number one challenge today when it comes to SIMs is actually bringing in security data into one centralized place or having a single pane of glass. The phrase single pane of glass has been used for years and years. However, it's very hard to actually achieve having one single pane of glass. So Azure Sentinel here comes in plays a vital role because it allows customers to scale when it comes to their data, and it allows customers to easily use or leverage the Microsoft solutions alongside of other sources and bring them together to correlate, to fuse alerts, and to also help SOC analysts prioritize the different incidents and alerts that are coming throughout the pipeline. So I first want to talk about the different data connectors that we have for Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel has data connectors that are first party, and those are the Microsoft products, like for example, Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, etc. And we also have third-party data connectors. One of our biggest scope and one of our biggest goals that we have is to make it really easy and seamless for customers to bring in data into Azure Sentinel. Hence, for that reason, we are focusing on data collection vehicles that can really allow customers to bring that data in from wherever in a matter of minutes. So here we have just a couple of different sources that are listed. For example, here we have Office 365, and that's how we're taking care of, use cases that include phishing campaigns. We have Azure, of course, as a native platform in which we are able to bring in logs and also alerts from. So at the moment, we do have the integration to bring in alerts and logs from Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Cloud App Security, which is critical when it comes to really understanding shadow IT and how data is traveling across the environment. We also have other Microsoft security tools that are also in place and that we do have out-of-the-box data connectors for. So all the first-party products or the native products that we do have a one-click in integration with those products. So a customer can really stand up Azure Sentinel and start ingesting critical logs in a matter of minutes. Now, I also want to talk about the third-party connectors, right? Right now, in the portal, if you were to go right now, we have roughly around 97 out-of-the-box data connectors that are available that also include different data collection vehicles. So right now, we do have the support for Palo Alto, Symantec, Bluecoat, Zscaler, and many other third-party sources. Again, these are all out of the box. But I do want to emphasize today that, however, if we do not have a data connector available out of the box for your third-party source, there's additional ways or additional data collection vehicles that are available as options to bring that data in. So for example, we have common event format, we support syslog, we support Graph Security API, and we also have a official output plugin for Logstash. So wherever your data is at, we do have the ability to bring that into Azure Sentinel to be able to integrate those different logs. I also want to talk about, Azure Sentinel being a cloud SIEM, and if you already have a existing SIEM, how would that work? So at the moment, if you already have a existing SIEM, like for example, Splunk, Logarithm, etc., we do have the ability to downstream and also upstream alerts and logs from those different sources. So that definitely allows customers to have a playing field that can be correlated, that has high synergy when it comes to integration, and that can also allow them to easily understand what's happening across the board.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that breakdown. I feel like every time I turn around, you guys are doing another private preview for a new data connector. So that's constantly being added to, which is great.
Yes.
All right. Next, I think, Matt, you have a couple slides on how to kind of perform this integration. Would you want to run through those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about this, and I'll talk more a little bit later with Chris about how and when and why you might want to use MSAS and Sentinel better together story. But let's first talk about how do you integrate MSAS or Microsoft Cloud App Security with Sentinel. Within the admin portal, it's actually super easy and it's really quick. Just in the upper right-hand corner, you click on the gear icon and you choose something called Security Extensions. And then from there, you click on the SIEM Agents tab, and you can click on the plus sign to add a new SIEM agent. Now, you'll have two different types. You'll have generic SIEM and you'll have Azure Sentinel. I'll come back to generic SIEM coming up here in a little bit because that is kind of a common question that I get. And when you choose Azure Sentinel as the SIEM agent, you'll come across a little dialog box and a wizard that will walk you through the integration. And so first, it's going to ask you, what do you want to send to Sentinel? Do you want to send all of your alerts? Do you want to be specific and maybe set some filters on different types of alerts, low, medium, or high, or filters based on certain activities, so on and so forth? And then, do you want to send your discovery log? So as you know, MSAS can go out and discover shadow IT, and I could feed in data sources such as firewall logs. So if I'm behind the firewall and I'm browsing different websites and using different SaaS applications out there, those firewall logs can be sent to MSAS. You could do some discovery around what people are using. If I'm using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint running on Windows 10, I can then use that as a connector in here so I can see, again, what SaaS apps people are using. And so that data I can actually send to Sentinel, and I'll talk about in a second why you might want to do that, but here's how I would do that. So I choose the types of data I want to send, and then from there, I'm ready to go. But there's actually another step to this. So we have to first configure it on the MCAS side, and then now we need to go over to Sentinel, and we need to finish the connection over on the Sentinel side. And this is often one of those forgotten steps. And so we do want to jump over to Sentinel and finish up the integration. And so if we log into Sentinel and we go to data connectors, and I could either filter on it or I could just do a quick search. Here I did a search for cloud, and there you can see Microsoft Cloud App Security. I'm going to choose Microsoft Cloud App Security as the connector, and I'm going to click on Open Connector Page over in the lower right-hand corner, that blue button. And when I click on that, I'm going to get a nice little set of instructions here on how to set this up. So first, I'm just going to go through the prerequisites. All right, so we've got a Sentinel workspace created. I do have the appropriate tenant permissions to be able to do this. I do have appropriate licensing in Microsoft Cloud App Security. So we're ready to rock and roll at that point. And then now we need to tell it the configuration we want to do. So just like we did over in MCAS, I now need to check the appropriate boxes for what kind of data do we want this thing to receive from MCAS. And then from there, I click on Enabled under Create Incidents, and I'm ready to go. Now, it's interesting. Some people do ask about, well, do I need to have it create incidents? And again, it depends on your operational cadence and what operations looks like for you. I like to recommend enabling it because, as you know, with Sentinel, when these alerts come in, it will automatically correlate and add them to an incident, and it makes investigation a lot easier. And then you can tie playbooks and all sorts of fun stuff to it. So I always choose that for mine. Now, once I enable these checkboxes and I click the Enable button, from there, it's ready to go. It's connected. Now, I do have some optional next steps here that I can take. So the first one is load in some of the workbooks. And these are Azure Monitor workbooks that allow you to take the data that's being received from the connector and visualize it. And I think this is super interesting. And Chris, feel free to jump in. But I love cybersecurity for a couple of reasons, but the main reason is it's all about the data. And with Sentinel, I can slice and dice that data however I like, make queries against it. But when I pair it with Azure Monitor, I can create these really interesting dashboards and reports to be able to gain new insights out of the data. And so the discovery logs that MCAS is collecting from can build some deeper reports, get some deeper insights that maybe I didn't get before. Yep. And so that's something that kind of comes to mind here. The other thing is I can create some of the rule analytic templates. And you can see that down there at the bottom where I click on create rule for those.
Yep. And actually, just to add on there, Matt, if you
sure.
Yes, back real quick. Yeah, I think the out-of-the-box content that Sentinel gives you is just phenomenal, right? As you mentioned, the workbooks is a visualization source that really allows you to understand what's happening, and it also allows the data to tell a story. As you alluded, the data is where it's at, right? That's where we need to dissect to understand exactly what different anomalous activities are actually happening across the entire environment. And then lastly, at the bottom here, I also want to just add some colors that out of the analytics that we have, these analytics are being built by our partners, our internal Microsoft security team. And the great thing about it is that it only takes a few clicks, to get this going and have this automatic detection, going for you when it comes to the data that's being ingested.
Yeah, excellent call out. Absolutely. So if I move on here, and I'll come back to workbooks in a minute, because I do think that's pretty interesting. But once I have this connected and data starts flowing, and I always kind of give it a little bit of time. You configure the integration on the MCAS side, you configure on the Sentinel side, let it propagate there throughout the system, and then data will start to flow in based on your filters that you have set and what you have configured. But here's an example of what that looks like. So this is where I enabled the connector. You can see I've got Microsoft Cloud App Security alerts flowing in. There's some things around blocking downloads and how a user was using Google Workspace, and they try to copy data out, and then it generates an alert. Here I can see some identity activity where users trying to come in from an infrequent country. And even down towards the bottom, you see it's getting mixed with alerts from Defender for Endpoint. So this is what that would look like. And then from here, I can drill in and click on one of these. and get a little bit more information about what's happening. And then when I click on investigate, just like other data connectors in Sentinel, I can click on investigate and open up a really nice view here that can aid me in my investigation. And so here's an example of where I generated some activity on a workstation. Obviously, Defender for Endpoint picked that up, but then also that workstation was doing some weird things with some SaaS apps and even the user's identity. So MCAS picked it up and generated some alerts. And now it's mixing that together in a single investigation, in a single incident on this screen. And from here, I can even branch out to these and view related alerts and kind of follow those breadcrumbs in my investigation. And so again, that's really the cool part here about Sentinel and about adding MCAS as a data connector. And one of the questions I often receive from some of my partners that I work with is, when and why would I want to have MCAS go to Sentinel? Because some people might think of MCAS, it's a CASB, right? But they might think of it as a SIM or maybe a light SIM. Well, as Chris mentioned earlier, it's things around, mixing it with third-party data sources. And so here is where I'm mixing it with alerts from Defender for Endpoint. But if this was a large enterprise environment, I would have firewall data coming in. I would have third-party security app data coming in, maybe data coming in from some other cloud apps like AWS. And being able to mix that and get a complete site picture of what's happening is critical. Otherwise, all I see is that single alert in MCAS. And then again, being able to visualize the data is pretty powerful, as you can see here.
Yep, I like this call out a lot. One of my colleagues on the MCAS team often refers to this as the blast radius, really tying all those entities together and seeing what's happening across the whole organization.
Yeah, it's really impressive, and I think it's actually really useful for somebody that's trying to do an investigation. And like I mentioned before, it is all about the data. The more data you have, the more context you have, and the more you can respond to whatever might be happening. And so this is just an example of what that would look like. And of course, you can see down there in the lower right-hand corner, I can then launch a playbook based on this and have it respond to this block downloads incident. Maybe I shut down a port in a firewall or do something downstream, right? Give you another example here of once you have the data connector set up. We talked about workbooks. I think these are pretty awesome. It's part of Azure Monitor, and as you feed data into Sentinel and goes into Azure Monitor, I can create these workbooks. And so each data connector typically has templates. And so here's a template for the discovery logs that was pre-created when I connected the data. And the visualizations you see here are really queries against the data. So I can customize this. I can even add my own little cards there based on a query that I want to make. And again, I can slice and dice it however I like to be able to get those new insights. And these are things that, frankly, you can't do in MCAS. MCAS has a great dashboard. I can see what SaaS apps are, and people are using out there in the environment. I can even block their usage directly in MCAS. I can see a lot of different things, but there's also things I can't see. And that's where I can really make this a data science problem and dig into it. And that's what I love about these workbooks. And for some of my partners I work with, when they go out and deliver this to their customers, they will create custom workbooks. They call them more like dashboards, and they'll create it based on the role at the customer. So, an IT leader might have one specific type of workbook with different views, and then somebody that's, maybe in security operations might have another, view. So that's an example of what you can do here with the data connector. So Chris, should we get into some of the top customer questions and
let's
what we
do
hear
it
out there?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
All right. One question I often receive is data retention. And how long is data kept in MCAS, and then how long is it kept in Sentinel, and when would I want to use MCAS over Sentinel? One of the ways I answer that when question is, what's data retention look like for you? Out of the box with MCAS, the activity logs are stored for 180 days, discovery data is for 90 days, alerts are 180 days, and governance logs are 120. So not that long, and you may have a requirement to save that longer. And so that's where Sentinel comes in, and being able to send that data over to Sentinel for longer term retention.
Yeah, we could definitely do over, I think it's like 720 days around that. But there's some customers that you may have some different regulatory compliance standards that you have to abide by that may need you to retain that data for up to 10, 12 years. So we also have Azure Data Explorer as another option that once you're done with that data in Sentinel, because again, you also got to think about, do I need this data forever, right? Do I need to hunt and have this data available for the next month, right? So once you're done with that data, Azure Data Explorer is definitely the recommended practice when it comes to retaining that data for up to 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's a great call out. Just to kind of make that real for a moment, I had a partner of mine, one of their customers was breached, and they were actually breached a year prior, but they didn't find out until that time. And so obviously they didn't have logs or anything, and so it was kind of an interesting exercise to try to investigate that. But you do want to make sure that you've got a good data retention schedule set, from a policy perspective, and then leverage these tools to help you get that. All right, another question. I'll just kind of go back to when should I use MCAS over Sentinel and why integrate it. We talked about data retention. The other one I really like and I tell people all the time about is playbooks and Sentinel. And so MCAS has the ability to do playbooks through Power Automate, and there's some really cool capability there. But again, I might have third-party tools and third-party things I need to go take an action on downstream, and that's where the playbooks and Sentinel come in handy. So, go back to my example of that block download incident we saw in Sentinel. That may trigger a playbook that will go out and take action in a firewall, maybe take action in one of my endpoint protection products, you name whatever it may be, and create a ticket in the ticketing system. That's where some of that power really comes to life. And so, Chris, do you have any comments there on playbooks and what you've seen?
Yeah, I love playbooks, man. SOAR is definitely how we reduce the alert fatigue across any SOC. And I also want to mention that we have automation rules is a brand new feature. It just went public this week. But automation rules, it really allows you to have near complete control over the order of execution when it comes to actions and different playbooks in one single automation rule. So that actually allows you to control the order of execution of the automation rules themselves, which will greatly help any customer to simplify their playbooks and also reducing everything into one single task or tasks that are very straightforward, right? So once you combine these different playbooks, you can definitely set automation rules that help to enhance the different activities and actions that are being actually, executed upon that incident. So Azure Sentinel, the biggest differentiator there is that you're able to get the third-party data source into there. And if you have, for example, a IBM Resilient or a ServiceNow, with Azure Sentinel, now we do have the capability to do bidirectional sync as well. So I do know that customers, they use other triaging sources like ServiceNow and also IBM Resilient. So for that reason, Sentinel is definitely the way to go for that.
Yeah,
Chris, I'm so glad that you just brought that up. I have had that question at least 3 times in the last month with customers that want to leverage a bidirectional capability specifically with now.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we definitely understand their pain, right? Because the pivoting between sources is what we're trying to eliminate when it comes to Azure Sentinel. I mean, think about, going from one platform to another several different times. That's going to go ahead and, increase the amount of time it takes to actually get the job done or respond to the attack. So right now we are supporting the bidirectional sync of not just incidents, but even comments from ServiceNow and also Azure Sentinel.
That's amazing. Just going to some other kind of frequently asked questions and things we often hear out there. I often get asked, is there a cost? And so there's a pricing page out there on the public website for Sentinel. And down towards the bottom, it will actually talk about what data sources can be ingested basically at no cost. And so it's things around the native Microsoft security products. If you go down there, you'll see things like being able to ingest at no cost alerts from Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Cloud App Security, Defender for Office, Defender for Identity. And so that's something I always like to reference. Now, with that being said, if I start taking data itself from MCAS and starting to ingest into Sentinel, that's going to be a little bit of a different story. So if I want to take logs from all those firewalls that it's collecting logs from and moving that over to Sentinel, obviously that there's going to be a cost associated with that. But Chris, do you have any comments or any stories you can share around that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to say that, especially when it comes to pricing for Azure Sentinel, I would highly recommend that if you're not doing a capacity reservation, that's definitely the way to go, right? I see oftentimes that customers that are bringing a large amount of volume when it comes to logs into Azure Sentinel, and they're going pay as you go, right? And that's why their bill is so high. So the recommendation here is that the capacity reservation allows you to have a fixed fee when it comes to your bill. So you basically select a tier, and that tier, it allows you to enable a predictable cost for Azure Sentinel. All right, so the capacity reservation, again, that's the recommendation when it comes to the billing in Azure Sentinel. But just to level set a little bit for just people that are starting out with Azure Sentinel is billed or when it comes to the logs that you're ingesting into Azure Sentinel, and also, the retention. So, the amount of logs that you bring into Azure Sentinel will dictate how much you're being billed for retention. I must say that at the moment, once you enable Azure Sentinel on any workspace, every gigabyte of data ingested into the workspace can be retained at no charge for the first 90 days, right? So you have 90 days of free retention, and then after that, you will get billed when it comes to the retention of those different logs.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Switching gears maybe a little bit to investigation, another question we often receive is, there's a ton of portals, right? There's Microsoft 365 Defender, there's MCAS we're looking at here, there's Sentinel, where do I start? My consulting answer is it depends on what you have, but let's say you have MCAS and you're feeding that data into Sentinel, those alerts into Sentinel, and then you have those third-party data connectors that Chris talked about feeding into Sentinel as well. That's a great starting point. And from there, letting you go out and follow those breadcrumbs, and eventually you'll probably have to log into the MCAS portal to get some more detailed information, about maybe what's happening with that alert. But definitely start there with Sentinel. And Chris, do you have anything to add about that, or anything have you seen?
Yeah, so we're trying to eliminate the pivoting, right? The pivoting, I feel like, is what SOC analysts have to do. I mean, think about the amount of enterprises and the number of, security platforms that they have. Some is 20 to 25, others is 50 plus, others is 100 plus, right? So for SOC analysts to really grasp a good picture of what's going on, it's almost impossible, right? So that's why it takes anywhere from minutes to hours to days for SOC analysts to remediate certain incidents. So what I would say for that is that right now we have a data connector in Azure Sentinel. It's the Microsoft 365 Defender. That data connector, and the plan here is that going forward, instead, alongside of getting in the incidents and alerts from those different respective solutions, we are also going to bring in the schema logs. So the schema logs is going to allow you to perform the exact same hunting. And for example, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, or even MCAS, you'll be able to do that in Azure Sentinel. So now you will have one centralized place where you can triage, remediate, investigate, and also hunt from one single platform.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's definitely changing the game.
Yeah.
Another great question is, how long does all this take? And I kind of walked through those screenshots in the slide.
Yep.
It literally does not take more than a few minutes, right? I mean, obviously there's a little bit of planning involved. Make sure you're licensed appropriately. Make sure Sentinel's running and it's healthy and ready to go. You have an active subscription, all those things. But once you check off those prerequisites, it's literally clicking those buttons and checking those boxes, and it does take a matter of minutes to get it set up, and then from there let it propagate, and the data starts to flow in. So it's not it's not like what it used to be, right? Where I've had to run through tons of wizards and do PowerShell commands. It's pretty seamless.
Yeah, people don't believe it at times, right? Like, what? 10 to 15 minutes and you can get all this data into one single place, right? Cybersecurity has that stigma or perspective that everything is very complicated and complex. With Azure Sentinel, we're trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, what else? I guess maybe going back to some of the deployment things a little bit. If a customer is using a log collector for MCAS, and that log collector is out there collecting firewall logs, so you can look at what SaaS apps are in use in the environment, so we sometimes get asked, well, can I use that same log collector for also Sentinel? And so, Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I would say that, I mean, just based on the different customer engagements, I would say to create another server, another log collector.
Yeah.
All right, just to differentiate those logs, and it'll just be better when it comes to the synergy in Azure Sentinel. All right,
Yeah.
I've seen many different customers make that mistake. So just create another log collector in order to get those logs into Azure Sentinel.
Yep, totally agree.
I do have a question for you, Matt.
Sure.
How about customers that use MSAS and they're new to Azure Sentinel. They already have an existing SIEM, and they want to downstream, or they want to export out the incidents or the alerts that MSAS is generating. And once we introduce Azure Sentinel into the pie, one of the things that I often see is that if you want to downstream those alerts, you do have to create a server for that. So can you talk a bit about that requirement of downstreaming alerts and incidents from MSAS to an on-prem or a legacy SIEM?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to go back a couple slides here to our wizard right here. And when we go to MSAS, when we click on security extensions under settings, and we click on SIEM agents, I showed you Sentinel, but there's one above that. It says generic SIEM. And so this is where I would have a syslog server, so to speak, and I would install an agent on that server, and that is how I would be able to integrate MSAS into a SIEM that's not Sentinel, right? And so it'd be through kind of that middleman server that's running an agent on it. And if I were to choose that, and I don't have a slide on this, but if I were to choose that, I would get to a similar screen that looks like this that would ask me, okay, how do you want to filter that? Right now, in that case, it's not going to be sending discovery logs. And that's one of the advantages of being able to use Sentinel. But it does allow you to send alerts, and it does allow you to send activity logs. And so you can send that off to that middleman server, if you will, that has the agent installed. And then from there, you can forward that off to your on-prem SIEM or whatever third-party SIEM you might have. And for a lot of our customers, they do that, especially when they might be in a situation where maybe they need to have Sentinel coexist with another SIEM, and maybe they're doing a migration or something. Maybe they're evaluating Sentinel, but they still have their existing SIEM. Whatever the case may be, take advantage of that SIEM agent. And this is actually pretty easy to do. In fact, I have a video out there on how to do it. But the MSAS engineering teams made it really simple. Now, one thing I'll point out, and this goes for basically any Microsoft product, but here we're talking about MSAS. If you notice on that screen, it says integration guide. Microsoft has done, in my opinion, just a fantastic job over the last few years in their technical documentation, where they actually walk you through step-by-step how to do something. So like in this case, if I'm trying to do a SIEM agent, there will be an integration guide for that the documentation will walk me through step-by-step. And same goes with Sentinel, right? I mean, the documentation is quite amazing, and it's constantly being updated. It's constantly being kept up to date with changes in the product. You can even give feedback on it. But that's how I would look at doing that on-prem SIEM, is through that generic SIEM agent when you come in here to security extensions.
Speaking of Microsoft documentation, Chris, you guys just came out with a What's New for Sentinel last month, right?
Yes. The What's New is a lovely resource for customers to understand and stay appraised of features. As Aaron just mentioned, earlier today, we have a lot of features coming out, things that are going public preview. And the way that we did it in the past was that as soon as a feature went public, we will go ahead and create a block for it. Now as part of our public documentation. So customers that want to stay appraised and on top of all the features that are coming out for Azure Sentinel, and also understanding the different security use cases that those different features actually satisfy, the What's New feature is a phenomenal place to stay appraised and have that better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, I'm just going to go on to the next slide here. There's some amazing training out there that's available. And Aaron, do you maybe want to talk about the MSAS Ninja training and the Sentinel Ninja training?
Absolutely. So I know we briefly touched on it on the beginning of the call. Cloud App Security does have Ninja training available. We released it last November and recently just did a March update as well. So if you're unfamiliar with that training, we do break it down into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So it really benefits individuals with various levels of familiarity. Did you have anything to add, Matt? I know you're featured quite a few times in our Ninja training.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of Ninja training overall. I mean, there's a Ninja training for MCAS, there's one for Sentinel, there's one for Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity. The Ninja training's pretty awesome because it will take you through step by step from, I call it 0 to hero, but if you don't know anything about the product, it'll take you through to basically become a ninja and get your build up your skills in it. And so the Sentinel integration's covered there, the SIM integration's covered there, along with a ton of other things with MCAS. And I encourage everybody who's maybe watching this or listening to it, check it out, and also check out the Sentinel Ninja training as well. The Sentinel Ninja training, it's probably like well over 100 hours, I want to say, of content. I mean, it's a lot, and you really do become an expert when you start to go through it. The last thing I'll mention here, and then we can kind of start closing things out, is I'm just going to go back to my point on it's all about the data. When you feed MCAS data into Sentinel and you mix it with that other third-party data, we talk about those workbooks. Maybe in another podcast we'll talk about notebooks and all the other advanced things you could do with the data. Really interesting things start to happen, things you didn't know about before. And in order to learn all of that, that's where this Ninja training really comes in handy, right? Being able to understand, well, what is the data coming out of MCAS? And then taking the Sentinel training, what's coming into Sentinel, and then being able to really do some unique things. So with that being said, Aaron, I think I'll just turn over to you if you want to close us out.
Awesome. Yes, I would. If we could just go to the last slide. Perfect. Well, first and foremost, I just want to give a huge thanks to both of you for joining this episode. Everything that we mentioned that has an associated link will be available in the description below. And we absolutely encourage you to like, comment, or subscribe. I just want to thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.